It's post All-Star game break. Cubs played today. What does that mean? Well, the Cubs, 8.5 back, 3.5 back, right? Last place in the Central, 3.5 games back, but a lot of teams ahead of them in the wild card race, and only a 10% chance of making the postseason. We're going to talk about some trade rumors or a lack of trade rumors. Bob Nightengale says the Cubs may stay put. Is that the right thing to do? And MLB.com's insider Mark Feinsand saying that maybe the Cubs are on Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Let's get into that right here on the Cubs Baseball channel. Like and subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Let's get this thing going, and let's talk a little Cubs baseball today. Some rumors as we've got a ball game against you-know-who at 1:20. What do you say, everybody? It's Mick Gillespie. Thanks for hanging out here on the Cubs Baseball channel. Let's get this thing going. Start of the second half. Let's bring some energy. Let's do it, right? At Broadcaster Mick. Love to hear from you guys. I do hear from you guys, and great, smart baseball fans. We will jump on and do a live show here soon, and we'll see how this thing goes. I mean, right now, we're talking about a little over a week before the trade deadline, and what is this team going to do? That's the question. We all want to know. What are they going to do? Are they going to make a move or not? And what kind of move are they going to make? Well, we talked about this on our podcast yesterday, but let me bring it up again. 8.5 back and in last place in the Central. Now, when I look at the teams that are ahead of the Cubs, I'm not saying, hey, you couldn't pass the Reds and you couldn't pass the Pirates. I mean, you could do that in a day or two, right? But what about the Cardinals? And then what about the Brewers? Somehow, some way, the Brewers are still in first place, which is just baffling to me. But they are. So now you got to figure out how you're going to get to the top of the division to make the playoffs, right? Or maybe 8.5 games where we are right now isn't realistic. I mean, teams have done it before, but most of the time, teams don't do that. And I mean, how many of you guys have been Cubs fans as long as I have? And the bottom line is, how many times have the Cubs ever done that? Like, they'd be like 8.5 games back after the All-Star break and they catch fire. Normally the other way. They had the 8.5 game lead and then they piss it away. And then you're like, oh, well, I guess, we didn't make the playoffs. Or maybe like last year where it looked like there was no way they weren't going to make the playoffs. And then they did not make the playoffs like they did. So what are they going to do this year? That's the question. 3.5 games back in the Central, though, does give you a lot of hope. And I think on the other hand, too, if you're the front office, and I keep saying this because you have to say it, there comes a point where when you don't succeed, you go out and you pay your manager more than anybody else has ever paid a manager before. You still don't make the playoffs. Some of the trade last year for DJ Hers, the other one that you made, I mean, you get giving players away, not getting a whole lot back, didn't have any success. The way you fired David Ross. I mean, it's just a lot of things that are compiling. And you're going, okay, the only thing that counters all of this is winning. And that's the problem that they have. If they go and they cut bait, then that might be the end of the front office, at least as we know it right now. Who knows? Maybe it's not. Maybe Tom Ricketts and the Ricketts family's like, hey, good try, guys. They seem to be pretty content last year with the team that ended up one game back at first. And then we found out they really weren't that content because David Ross got kicked out, So it was like, hey, we'll keep a good front here. Really, we're pissed off. We want to make the playoffs. And if you're the leader of the team and we didn't make it, you're the one that's going to pay the price, right? Well, it hasn't been any better. So it's been about the same or a little bit worse than it was last year at this time. Frustrating. Now, there's been a rash of injuries, but in the sport of baseball, there's no excuses. I mean, you got a 40-man roster. So if someone goes down, you got to have somebody else to come ready to come up. Sometimes it takes luck, whatever. But that's where we are right now, right? Here's the chances to make the playoffs: 10.5% and 3.4% to win the division. It's under 1 to win the World Series. I think that's the one that matters to me, because if you're not going to win the World Series, then you really have to evaluate what your team is. And we've seen this before. It was the exact same thing last year. we know that the team didn't make the playoffs because when the games were important, like against the team that they're playing today in the Arizona Diamondbacks, they lost. So the only time they really won was when they were going to break the team up, which is what's happening again right now. So it'd be interesting. Now, do I think that this Cubs team could do something? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good team, but it's not a good team off of paper. Like on paper, hey, we got all these guys. On paper, they just aren't that good. And off paper, like in the real games, they aren't. Now, I mean, I'm glad that they've won some games lately. It's actually made it a lot more fun when they go out and win some games. But being at 500 isn't winning a World Series. It just puts you in the mix to make the playoffs. So let's talk a couple of trades, okay? Here's Bob Nightengale of USA Today talking about the Cubs, and he basically said Cubs may stay put at the deadline. And this one, to me, was a little bit concerning because I didn't want the Cubs to stay put at the deadline. And to be honest with you, when I read this, I know that Bob Nightingale's pretty good on this stuff. I mean, think about when Shohei Ohtani was going and he's kind of throwing his thoughts in that, and then, giving his opinions and prognostications and all that. And then Shota Imanaga, I mean, he kept saying the Cubs were in it and then they ended up getting him. And I feel like Bob's been around forever. I mean, I do think that if he says that, hey, that the Cubs and some other teams might stay put and not sell, that tells me that the front office is kind of hoping that they can make the playoffs. And look, if the Cubs make the playoffs, then the front office would be safe. I mean, and that's all you can ask for. And last year, look at it. I mean, think of all the wild card teams that actually had better playoff appearances than the teams that won 100 games, right? But is 47-51 good enough? I mean, I get it. The Cubs won 7 out of their last 10 games, and they're 3.5 games back in the wild card. But I mean, is this really a pennant race, or did they just win a couple games and kind of just creep back in it enough where you feel like, okay, well, maybe there's a chance here, right? I don't think there's a chance to win the World Series, and that's what I'm saying. That has to be the goal, is to have a team that could legitimately win a World Series, not just a team that you don't want to trade at the deadline, right? But the Mets and the Rangers, he mentioned as well. Well, the Mets and the Rangers, I think the Rangers won the World Series. They're getting healthy, but they won the World Series last year. You're not going to break that team up. They showed you that they can get hot and win. And then the Mets, the owner's not going to sell. I mean, but right now, if the season ended, they'd be in the playoffs anyway. But I just don't see that. Their owner's the closest thing we have to George Steinbrenner. He's not giving up on this team. He'll pay over the luxury tax. He doesn't care, and they'll go after it. So here's the guys that you think about. Cody Bellinger, well, hit, broken finger. He's going to go on the IL. I think he'll be back and close to healthy by the time the trade deadline comes. I've seen these fingers before. Now, I don't know the specifics of his finger. I don't think any of you guys do either. But the bottom line is this, is that if it's not a major break, then, you might be able to get him back sooner than later. I mean, with all of the, the healing techniques and technologies and all that stuff now. And he would have been, to me, a healthy Cody Bellinger, one of the most sought after candidates to trade, because they just aren't a lot of teams that feel like they're out of it. And you could have got a big haul back for him just because it's a seller's market. And then the other guy's Nico Horner. And if a team got Nico Horner, I mean, he's under control until 2026. He's not paid a whole lot of money. He's a Gold Glove winner. He's pretty consistent. And I feel like he has underperformed with the power in his game because he barrels the ball up so much. I'm just not sure why he doesn't hit more home runs, but he makes like $12 million a year, for a Gold Glove second baseman that can hit, that can set the tables for you. That's not too bad. And then Cody Bellinger, $30 million for next year with, his option. So he could opt out. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. And then the last year's $20 million. I mean, you get him for $20 million. He's still a young guy. And he's not having the year that we saw him have a year ago, but he's still a really good player. So, we'll see what happens there. Now that they've announced, and they just announced that the Cubs are playing in Japan next year, I don't imagine that the Cubs are going to put Seiya Suzuki up for sale, and I never heard his name out there. I just thought, hey, you're paying him the money. His defense isn't really that good. He's hurt a lot. Hey, maybe you trade him. But now that you're going to Japan, I mean, that is a global market over there that loves baseball, and you got him and you got Imanaga, going there to play the Dodgers in March of next year. That's going to be huge. I mean, that is going to be absolutely enormous. Not just because it's two of the biggest brands in baseball, the two biggest brands in the National League. No, it's because not only are they the biggest brands, but they have the best Japanese players on those teams. So you're bringing a team to Tokyo. It's like, hey, man, here you guys got Yamamoto, you got Ohtani, we got Suzuki, and we got Imanaga. Let's go. And they're going to remember those players from when they were playing on teams in Japan. So I think that's pretty cool. So I don't see him going out there. Now, the other one is Mark Feinsand, of MLB.com, talking about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Now, I'm not saying that the Cubs are going to trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr., but I'm not saying that they wouldn't. Now, this one wouldn't surprise me because the problem that the Cubs have in a lot of people's minds are that they don't have premier players, right? They don't have a lot of stars. They got Cody Bellinger. One scout told me that the Cubs, they have a bunch of fives. That's kind of like average players. When they won the World Series at that time, they had a bunch of star players. They were young, but they were star players around the diamond. So, could a possible deal for, someone of Vlad Guerrero's stature be in the Cubs' future? Think about how big it would be to have Vlad Guerrero Jr., in a Cubs uniform. Now, he was basically asked about being on the trade block, or rumors about being on the trade block. And basically he just said, like I've mentioned before, I can control what I can control. I'm just trying to go out there and give my 100%, and whatever happens after that, I can control it, right? Maybe you use him as a DH. Maybe you put him at first base, although Michael Busch has been a really good first baseman, but Vlad Jr. would be a star player. Who knows how this would work out, but his dad was one of the most exciting players I've ever seen play baseball. I always thought that one of the top 5 most exciting players Vlad Guerrero was when he was in the major leagues, and his son, has been a highly touted prospect that would be a really fun addition to the Cubs. And maybe that's a trade you make. Maybe you get rid of some of your guys and you get some of their guys, and you're saying, hey, the Blue Jays are underperforming with the guys that they have. We're underperforming with the guys that we have. Let's shake up the rosters. And teams used to do that a lot more. And that's not a bad thing, but sometimes I think of the Blue Jays making the trade with the Padres for Fred McGriff and getting Roberto Alomar Jr., and that deal, and basically all of a sudden winning a bunch of World Series, back in the 90s. And that happens. Tony Fernandez, remember him? Yeah, I mean, like, sometimes you got to give up your good players to get good players, to get the right players. And that's something that maybe the Cubs would be interested in. I think that if you're not going to sell as in, hey, we're going to give up our best players and get prospects back, if you could go, basically man for man in a trade with a team that's like the Blue Jays or, one of these other kind of, fringe teams, you roll the dice and maybe you change the roster around, you catch fire and you win. Maybe you're just mixing it up, maybe just having a different guy in there. To me, the Cubs need to have a little bit more fire. And that's been the problem. When they were bad for 2 months, they just played like a dead fish. And I know there were some injuries involved and all that. And then all of a sudden, they're back to playing the kind of baseball that you love to watch. But it just hasn't been consistent enough to make you comfortable when your chances to make the playoffs are 85% that you don't make it. Yeah, right? 85% you don't make it and 10.5 that you do. I don't like those odds. I want the odds that are 95% I'm going to make it, 85% I'm going to make it, And then that's when you go out and make trades to try to make your roster better. That's why that was the problem that I had with the Cubs at the deadline last year. Is that you're rolling with a 68% chance you're not going to make it, 70% chance you're not going to make it, 72%, and then you go out and trade and you still don't make it because you had a 70-some% chance to not make it in the first place. So anyway, that's where we are right now, guys. Appreciate all of you hanging out. We'll keep you updated. I know there's an open roster spot. That'll be figured out here soon. Probably, maybe by the time you're watching this video. But we'll throw something up on the channel when that happens. Like and subscribe. Again, thank you so much. Share with your friends. We appreciate you being here more than you know. I know there's a lot of other Cubs channels out there. And, nothing against anybody else. I just want you guys to come here and hang with us. And I appreciate it when you do. Go Cubs.